The aroma of roasted meat filled the spacious dining room, mixing with the warmth of candles and the muted light of the chandelier. The air was filled with the scent of rosemary, garlic, and something else. Something deeper, richer, more piercing. It clung to every surface, soaked into the walls, and lingered on the lips after each bite. The table was impeccably set, a snow-white tablecloth, silverware, wine glasses filled halfway with a dark red drink. The guests sat in a semicircle, laughing, talking, exchanging glances full of pleasure. It was one of those dinners that seemed eternal, imbued with coziness and family warmth, just like the ones Lewis Hunt always arranged. He sat at the head of the table, slightly leaning back, one arm resting on the back of the chair, the other casually twirling a wine glass. His smile was wide, relaxed, almost lazy, like that of a man enjoying the moment, knowing that everything was going as it should. He watched everyone who took a bite, chewed, savored the dish he was so proud of. "Louis, this is amazing," said Megan, Emily's sister. She ran her tongue over her lips, savoring the aftertaste. "God, I don't know what you added to the marinade, but it's just divine." "The secret is in patience," he replied with a slight nod, allowing the corners of his mouth to twitch upward. "Good meat requires time to absorb the right flavor." "This is damn delicious." Victor, his best friend, chimed in. "Bro, you're really a genius. I think you could easily open a restaurant if you wanted to." Louis smirked, pretending to ponder his friend's words. He raised his glass and took a slow sip, feeling the warm wine burn his lips. He was content. Everything was going according to plan. The children were also there, Lila, 10, and Evan, 7. They ate silently, exchanging brief glances. Lila put down her fork and frowned. "Dad, didn't Mom say when she'd be back?" Her voice sounded cautious, but there was worry in it. A moment of silence fell over the table, an invisible pause filled with something sticky and dark. Louis smiled at his daughter. "Soon, sweetheart." His voice was soft, soothing. She went to rest, to unwind a bit. She needed it. Megan tilted her head, looking at him intently. "It's quite strange that she didn't call me or the kid," she said slowly, as if tasting the words. "Have you talked to her?" Louis paused as if thinking, and then sighed. "She called me last night." He lied easily, gracefully bringing the fork to his mouth. "Said she needed some time for herself." Megan didn't take her eyes off him. Her intuition screamed that something was wrong, but there was no evidence. The rest of the guests seemed satisfied with the explanation and returned to their meal. Only Lila continued to look at her father with doubt. She felt that he was lying. Louis leaned back in his chair, watching the guests eagerly finish their portions. He caught himself enjoying the moment, the sweet feeling of control, the knowledge that they suspected nothing. He even allowed himself a brief, barely noticeable smile. Victor put down his fork on the plate, sighing contentedly. "Listen, man, what kind of meat is this? It's kind of special, like beef, but with a richer flavor." Time stood still. Lila's fork froze in the air, her breath caught. Megan also looked up. Louis held Victor's gaze, his smile unwavering. "Family recipe," he replied calmly. "You know, I don't reveal kitchen secrets." The guests laughed, but at that moment, Lila felt something that gripped her throat with cold fingers of fear. The wine in Louis's glass trembled slightly. He saw how Lila was looking at him, too intently for a 10-year-old. He knew that look. He had seen it before. He realized that she needed time to piece it all together. He knew it was only a matter of time. He raised his glass, hiding a smirk. "Well then," he said, looking at everyone, "to family, to us." The glasses clinked, laughter spread across the table. But for Lila, the sound of that evening was completely different, the crack of a breaking reality. And then for a few seconds, Louis allowed himself to wonder, how far would he go to keep a secret? Louis Hunt was a man admired by many. At 42, he had it all. A restaurant with a stellar reputation, the attention of critics, grateful clients, and the image of a successful man. He was the one young chefs dreamed of becoming, and his dishes were the talk of the elite circles of Los Angeles. But that was only one side of his life. Beyond the elegant dining rooms, beyond the smiles for the cameras and handshakes with wealthy clients, Louis hid a secret that no one should know. His path into the world of haute cuisine began not with culinary schools but with dark alleys where deals were made in whispers, not with sommeliers. He was deeply involved in the criminal world, money laundering through a network of elite restaurants, collaborating with drug cartels, and manipulating the supply of rare products. The money flowing into his establishment came not only from gourmands but also from those seeking to hide millions from the authorities. Louis Hunt never thought his past would catch up with him so soon. For years he had built his life, layer by layer, covering the truth with a shiny veneer of success. He was confident that he controlled everything, that every detail of his life was so perfectly arranged that no one would dare look deeper. But the ghosts of the past never disappear without a trace. In recent weeks, Louis had begun to notice subtle changes. His environment, which had always seemed predictable, had become a source of concern. Colleagues in the restaurant business were looking at him a little longer than usual. Waiters were whispering, and Megan, Emily's sister, was showing too much interest in his life. She was asking questions he didn't have ready answers for. Even his own home was no longer a sanctuary. Lila was increasingly looking at him with suspicion, as if trying to see something in him that she hadn't noticed before. She was a smart girl, too smart for her 10 years. She sensed the lie, even if she couldn't explain it. One evening, when he returned home later than usual, Louis noticed that the door to his office was ajar. His heart skipped a beat. No one was supposed to go in there. Rushing inside, he found Lila leaning over his desk, her small fingers clutching one of the old envelopes he had so carefully hidden. "What are you doing here?" His voice sounded harsher than he intended. Lila flinched but didn't let go of the envelope. "I was looking—" She hesitated, clearly choosing her words. "I wanted to find something about Mom. You never said where she was." Louis slowly exhaled, suppressing his irritation. He stepped forward and took the envelope from her hands, trying to appear calm. "You shouldn't be rummaging through my things, Lila," he said more gently. "Your mom just went away for a while. You trust me, right?" The girl hesitated, then nodded, but doubt lingered in her eyes. Phone calls started coming more frequently. Anonymous numbers, short beeps, silence on the other end of the line. These were not just coincidences. Louis knew his past was not going to leave him alone. One night, he couldn't take it anymore and picked up the phone. "Who is this?" His voice was tense. Silence. Then a muffled male voice said, "Did you think you could hide, Louis? Thought everything would stay in the past?" Louis's throat went dry. He wanted to say something, but the line went dead. He stood in the darkness of his office, listening to the dial tone. For the first time in a long time, he felt fear. Problems started at the restaurant. One of his business partners, a man he had worked with even before his success, suddenly appeared at his establishment. Antonio Delgado, a former supplier connected to the cartels. His presence meant one thing: old business had caught up with him. "You know debts don't just disappear, Louis," said Antonio, leaning across the table. "We need to talk." Louis knew refusal was not an option. He had crossed the line once. Now that line was crumbling beneath his feet. Everything he had so long concealed was slowly but surely coming to light. Lila knew he was lying. Megan suspected something more. Someone from the past knew where to find him. And if he didn't find a way to regain control, everything he had built would crumble. And this time, irreparably. Louis felt the pressure mounting. Everything he had so carefully hidden was beginning to unravel. Lila wouldn't let up with her questions. Megan was becoming increasingly suspicious, and calls from unknown numbers kept coming. It seemed like his past was literally chasing him. He began to notice little things he wouldn't have paid attention to before. A car parked near their house for the second day in a row, a shadow flitting past the restaurant window as he left in the evening. Even the cashier at the gas station looked at him a little too long. Louis wasn't paranoid, but his intuition told him he was being watched. One evening, after the children had gone to bed, he found Megan in the kitchen. She was sitting at the table, lazily stirring her tea, but her gaze was fixed on him. "Louis," her voice was quiet but firm, "you're hiding something." He froze but didn't let his emotions show. What makes you say that? He asked, moving closer. Megan set her cup on the table and crossed her arms. I know Emily. She would never have left like this, without calling, without a note, without an explanation. And you're acting like nothing happened. Lewis smiled, trying to appear nonchalant. She just got tired, Megan. She wanted to get away, to escape all this noise. You're lying, Megan interrupted sharply. And I'm going to find out the truth. Lewis clenched his teeth. He realized he was running out of time. The next day, as he was leaving the restaurant, he found a small white envelope left on the windshield of his car. Inside was just one sentence, handwritten. Did you think this would stay in the past forever? Lewis's hands clenched into fists. He looked around, but the street was empty. Someone was playing with him. Someone was letting him know they knew. The question was, how much? Stress was taking its toll. He became irritable, losing control over little things. At the restaurant, he made a gross mistake in his calculations. Victor noticed and asked what was wrong. Just tired, Lewis muttered, brushing him off. But Victor didn't believe him. You're not yourself, he said. Something happened? Lewis forced a smile. Everything's under control, buddy. But even he no longer believed it. Late one evening, Lewis was driving home. Rain pounded on the roof of the car. The wipers couldn't keep up with the torrents of water. He turned onto his street, but a chill ran down his spine. In the side mirror, he glimpsed the headlights of another car. It was following him. Lewis made a sharp turn onto a side street. The car followed. His pulse raced. He tried another maneuver. The shadow behind him didn't disappear. At the next traffic light, he stopped and took a deep breath. The car behind him also stopped, not signaling. Lewis slowly reached into the glove compartment where his gun lay. But before he could pull it out, his phone vibrated. A message. It was short. I'm nearby. Lewis realized the game was over. Someone wanted to get to him, and they weren't going to stop. He had a choice. Wait for them to catch up or make the first move. He gripped the phone in his hand, feeling a cold realization spread through his veins. He wasn't going to sit idly by. Lewis understood that he couldn't delay any longer. He was in danger, and if he didn't take control of the situation, his past would crush him. He spent the night pondering his options. It seemed like any decision he made would lead to disaster. But doing nothing was the worst option. At 3 a.m, he called Antonio Delgado. They hadn't spoken in years, but Antonio was still an influential figure in the criminal world. Do you know who's after me? Lewis asked, his voice low and guarded. Antonio paused, then chuckled softly. If someone's hunting you, Lewis, it's not my people. But I've heard that someone's been asking questions about you, and these are people you don't want to mess with. Lewis gripped the phone. He was waiting for confirmation, but hearing it was still hard. I need to meet with them. Find out what they want. You don't understand how this works. Antonio's voice was icy. When people like that start getting interested in you, you're no longer in control. The next morning, Lewis woke up to a phone call. Lewis Hunt? A stranger's voice on the other end was unfamiliar, calm, and too composed. We know what you did. You were given time, but now it's up. Who is this? Lewis sat up in bed, his heart pounding in his chest. Meet. Today. 10 o'clock. The old hangar at the pier. The line went dead. Lewis slowly lowered the phone. This was an invitation he couldn't refuse. Lewis spent the day with Lila and Evan. He knew this might be the last time he saw them. He took them to the park, bought them ice cream, made them laugh. Lila, of course, still sensed something was off. She watched him as if she knew he was about to disappear. When they returned home, he tucked them into bed and then lingered at their door. He watched them breathe evenly, peacefully, as if the world around them wasn't crumbling. He wanted to tell them something important, something they would remember if he didn't return. I love you, he whispered. The hangar at the pier was dark and empty. Only a lonely streetlight flickered, illuminating the metal walls. Lewis parked his car and got out, trying to appear confident. He felt beads of sweat on his neck. In the shadows stood 2 men, one tall and thin, with cold eyes, the other massive, with rough features. Lewis Hunt, the tall one spoke. You thought you could disappear? That no one would find out? What do you want? Lewis clenched his fists. Money? I'll pay. The massive one smirked. We don't need your money. We need silence. You know too much. Lewis realized there would be no negotiations. He had been lured here not for a discussion. He acted on instinct. He pulled the gun from his pocket and shot the massive one first. The man staggered back, clutching his wound. The tall one lunged forward, but Lewis was already running to his car. Shots rang out behind him. Bullets whizzed past, one shattered the side mirror. He dove into the car, turned the key, and sped away. The car screeched as it raced off. In the mirror, he saw the tall figures rushing to their car. They weren't going to let him go so easily. Lewis raced through the night streets, his heart pounding. He knew his time was running out. Now they would never leave him alone. And then he realized the only way to survive was to strike first. He couldn't keep running. He needed to destroy those who were hunting him before they destroyed him. Lewis sped down the night highway, his heart pounding in his chest, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. In the rearview mirror, headlights flashed. His pursuers weren't giving up. They knew who he was, knew what he had done, and now their goal was to destroy him before he could outmaneuver them. He had nowhere to hide. He understood that he was cornered. If he stopped, it was over. They would tear him to pieces. The only way out was not just to save himself, but to destroy those who threatened his life. Lewis turned off the main highway, heading into the industrial part of the city. He knew these places. Dark alleys, abandoned warehouses, and old docks were the perfect place to make his final move. He couldn't just keep running. He had to outsmart his enemies. He abruptly stopped in the shadow of an old hangar and turned off his headlights. His car blended into the night. He pulled the gun from the glove compartment and took a deep breath. They didn't know he had stopped. They sped past, but then their brakes screeched. They realized they had lost him. Now he had a chance. Lewis slipped out of the car, moving along the wall of the hangar, his breathing steady, his heart cold. He was no longer a chef. He was no longer a man hiding from his past. He was a hunter. When the two pursuers emerged from their car, he was ready. He saw them cautiously moving along the road, trying to find him. He knew they were armed. He knew they were experienced. But he knew this place better. He waited for the right moment. One of them turned a corner of the building and immediately took a bullet to the chest. The other rushed back, but Lewis was already moving. He fired again, aiming precisely. The second one fell, writhing on the ground. Lewis approached, watching his enemy's agony. He knew there was no turning back. "Who sent you?" he asked, keeping the gun ready. The wounded man coughed, blood trickling down his chin. He smirked. "This is just the beginning, Hunt. You can't hide." Lewis pulled the trigger. He couldn't go home. Now he was being hunted not just by these two. There was a whole network. Those who sent them wouldn't stop. He knew his time was running out. He headed to the one place where he could find answers. To Antonio Delgado. Antonio met him in a dark room behind a locked door. His face was expressionless. "You've brought death with you, Lewis," he said calmly, taking a cigar out of his mouth. "I warned you." Lewis sat down across from him, placing the gun on the table. "Tell me who they are, and I'll take care of it." Antonio smirked. "You think you can stop this? You're just a chef who got in too deep. They're professionals. If you killed their people, they'll come after you with even more fury." Lewis looked him in the eye. "Then tell me where to find them. I won't give them a chance." Antonio looked at him for a long time, then nodded. "All right, then listen carefully." Now Lewis had a plan. He knew where to find those who were trying to destroy him. He wasn't going to run anymore. He was going to strike first. Lewis knew he had little time left. He had obtained an address from Antonio, a place where those who were hunting him were hiding. It was a warehouse on the outskirts of the city, abandoned and forgotten, but perfect for their operations. He couldn't hide anymore, couldn't wait for the next strike. He had to make his own move. All day he prepared. He checked his weapon, loaded the bullets, took everything he might need. He couldn't afford any mistakes. This time the stakes were too high. Before leaving, he left a letter for Lila and Evan. If something went wrong, at least they would know the truth. He understood that he might never see them again, but he had no choice. The warehouse stood in the darkness, lit only by a few distant streetlights. Lewis parked his car a few blocks away and approached on foot. The air smelled of rust and something rotten. He heard voices inside. The people who wanted him dead were here. Carefully surveying the building, he found a side entrance, picked the lock, and staying in the shadows, slipped inside. He took the first one down silently, crept up from behind, knife to the throat, in silence. The second one heard a rustle and turned around, but he didn't have time to shoot. A bullet to the forehead, and he fell without a sound. Then chaos ensued. The others noticed him. A shootout began. Lewis took cover behind crates, waiting for his moment. His breathing was steady, his movements precise. He knew he had no way back. One of the thugs tried to flank him from behind, but Lewis anticipated it. Spinning around, he fired 3 precise shots. The body hit the concrete. At the end of the corridor stood the man he was looking for, tall, with a cold gaze and a crooked smile. He didn't try to run. He was waiting. "Well, Lewis," he said, holding a gun in his hand, "you should have just disappeared, but now you're here. What's your plan?" "To kill you," Lewis replied calmly. The man smirked. "You're too late. It's all been decided." And at that moment, Lewis heard a faint sound behind him. He realized he had walked into a trap. Without hesitation, he fired first. The bullet hit the leader in the chest, but at the same time, someone from the shadows fired at Lewis. Pain shot through his shoulder, and he staggered but didn't fall. He spun around and fired blindly. There was a scream. The last enemy fell. Blood dripped from his arm. He was wounded but alive. He looked around. There were only corpses. He had done it. He had won. Lewis left the warehouse, pressing his wound. He didn't know what would happen next. He had destroyed his enemies, but that didn't mean it was all over. Questions awaited him. Consequences awaited him. He got into the car and looked at the city. He could leave, start over, or return to his children and try to explain everything. He made his choice. The engine started and the car disappeared into the night.